very much. The U.S. updating some of its international COVID-19 travel guidelines. Now the Biden administration says it will require foreign nationals to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 and also show proof of vaccination before flying to the U.S. That's going to start in early November.
Joining us now to discuss is Francesca Page, travel journalist, and our panelists, Bobby Eberle, Jessie Jane Duff, and Jenna Ellis. All right, I want to break this down, Francesca. Let's take a look here. So foreign nationals must be fully vaccinated to enter the U.S. Non-citizens must show proof of vaccination and a negative COVID test taken within 3 days of departure. Proof of vaccination is required prior to boarding a U.S.-bound flight, and a 14-day quarantine lifted for fully vaccinated international travelers. All right, take us through this.
Okay, well, we first need to address this from the perspective of the consumer traveler and what concerns they may have regarding the fine print. For example, what vaccines will be considered acceptable, as well as what the so-called stricter protocols around this new individual-based system will look like. Now, international travelers' big concern is still going to be, what if I get sick while I'm away from home? Now, given that the proof of a negative test within 3 days still applies, you're going to think about travel insurance, and most policies are covering that extra hotel days for quarantine if you test positive for your return. Now, there are programs out there, like I've mentioned before, MedJet, where if you're hospitalized, they're going to get you moved to your hospital back at home, even for COVID. So you want to know all the parts and information before you think about any international travel at this point.
One more quick question for you, Francesca. What about the AstraZeneca vaccine? Is that acceptable by U.S. standards when it comes to traveling internationally as a foreign national?
Well, I think we're waiting to find out all this information. A lot is still to be determined. One of the biggest questions, of course, is what about unvaccinated Americans? Now, unvaccinated Americans will be subject to more stringent requirements under the new plan. They're going to be required to have a negative test with one day of departure and will be required to test again upon arriving. We also know that this plan outlines expanded contact tracing, which will soon be issued by the CDC.
Okay. Either way, it sounds like a lot of people are taking a lot of steps to ensure people are safe when they're traveling, and you feel secure doing so. And of course, Jessie Jane, when you compare traveling internationally from Europe, it's much different than what we're seeing at the southern border, where we don't have much guidance on what it's like to ensure safety of those entering the country.
Well, you would think that President Biden would be putting this in place for every illegal that's coming across the border. Instead, we have 1.2 million illegals that have crossed the border, and I'm quite confident there has been more than just COVID present. It is a disgrace that we see this hypocrisy where we're suggesting that those who want to come here legally, that have verifiable passports, should go through this process, which I'm fine with international travel, but on the other hand, if you want to come here illegally, there is no standard in place. And Jen Psaki has actually stated to the American public, well, they're not going to be here for long. Meanwhile, they have distributed many illegals throughout our country. And we often know that there's the getaways that often never even go under scrutiny by the U.S. government. So end of the day, I'm pleased to hear that we're going to have some type of guidelines, and it's a very reasonable guideline to have a COVID-free test. But on our border, not so much.
Yeah, Jenna, I think that a lot of people agree. Like, listen, if I have to travel, I'll, take the COVID test, and that's what we have to do. But then we see these legal immigrants coming over, and we don't know if they're getting tested. We don't know if they're certainly not social distancing. There's a lot of unknown. And Jen Psaki was asked about it, and she said, well, they're not planning on staying here long. I mean, I think that they weren't just hanging out here for a little trip.
Yeah, well, obviously, it's blatant hypocrisy by the Democrats who really don't care about health and safety as much as they do just their big brother sorts of policies. But I want to go back to this whole idea of international travel and reject the premise and this basic assumption that any of this is for health and safety reasons. I mean, we've seen the CDC putting out guidelines that absolutely reject the science, that don't make sense. And for international travelers to have to either be vaccinated or even take these types of COVID tests, the right to travel is something that in the United States should be protected by our government. And this is a significant burden on the vaccinated and unvaccinated alike. And so I reject the premise that this is the best policy and the best practice. This is only going to lead to more of Biden's unconstitutional vaccine mandates. And I don't think that Americans should be applauding this as under the auspices of health and safety. I think it's ridiculous.
You know, as we were talking about earlier in the show, the president had made an announcement about the CDC, their recommendation for the third dose of the Pfizer vaccine, that booster shot, 6 months, 65 plus, or at high-risk individuals. Francesca, when it comes to, again, those people who want to travel here and attaining fully vaccinated status, have we heard any guidance when it comes to getting the third dose?
I don't think at this point we have. As I've mentioned, I think we're just kind of waiting to see what the details on this will be. And of course, people really want to know. I know myself, being British, I have family over in the UK and I have family here. And some of us haven't seen each other in a really long time. So I think, as I mentioned initially, the fine print is the thing here. And also the other thing to talk about here is how this is going to affect not only travel in terms of people going on vacation, but also business travel and how it's going to affect the U.S. economy, because there is the argument that people have made that lifting international travel restrictions will boost the U.S. economy. However, the CDC are still saying that they're strongly recommending against traveling still, especially if you haven't been vaccinated internationally. So the idea that tourism will suddenly spike is really to be determined.
Okay, we'll wait and see. Francesca Page, thank you very much. Panel, stay with us. We did want to take you now to our breaking news we're following. The House voting on a bill to codify